Good artists copy, great artists steal. I'm sure you've heard this Picasso quote before. Of course, it's not meant to be taken literally. What he really means is not to worry whether your creation is too similar to something that already exists. Art inspires more art, so it's not important whether you borrow ideas from other people. What matters is what you do with those ideas. On an unrelated note, let's talk about the Divergent movies. This series was one of the more popular ones to spawn out of the young adult dystopian fiction craze of the early 2010s. It was part of the Big Three, along with The Hunger Games and The Maze Runner, all getting film adaptations. These are what we're going to discuss today, not the novels. I might briefly mention a few slight changes from them, but the main focus is going to be on studios' tendencies to copy what's popular. My girlfriend and I love seeing bad movies together, so we rewatched the Divergent series a couple months back. We were having a blast laughing at the poorly aged CGI, cliched writing, and the fact that Peter's only defining personality trait is being an asshole.
Hello?
You can still find my ramblings about all three films on Twitter. That being said, I had a revelation during the third movie. Every problem with the overarching narrative stems from that Picasso quote I mentioned at the start of the video. The producers tried too hard to copy what was popular at the time. Let's do some quick surface level comparisons. First, The Hunger Games. We have a 16-year-old woman as our protagonist, who was born and raised into a society divided into factions. Over the course of the trilogy, she gets into political turmoil and takes part in an uprising against a system that has treated her harshly. Wow, that plot summary seems to line up perfectly with Divergent. Oh well, it must be a coincidence. What about The Maze Runner? Well, we again have a teenage protagonist who lives in a society trapped behind some walls, with no knowledge of what's beyond. After finally completing a series of trials, they venture beyond to discover a post-apocalyptic wasteland and find out that they were part of an experiment designed to help humanity prosper once again. And yes, this is also the plot of Divergent. Clearly, the movies have some similarities to other popular franchises. Honestly, I don't have an issue with this. In fact, the series they take inspiration from copy their main concepts from literature throughout history too. The problem isn't the copying itself, but the way in which Divergent goes about it. To see what I mean, let's compare the three and see how they implement existing ideas. The original, the most popular, and the best of the Big Three. The Hunger Games needs no introduction, but here's a quick rundown in case you haven't heard of it. The first book released in 2008 and revolved around Katniss Everdeen, a teenage girl boss who volunteers to participate in a battle royale to the death to stop her sister from suffering the same fate. The first film released in 2012 and was co-written by the author Suzanne Collins herself, hence it's extremely faithful to the book. Of course, we're not here to talk about what makes the franchise good, rather where it gets its ideas from. Suzanne is extremely open about this, citing multiple sources of inspiration.
Probably the first inspiration from the Hunger Games came from the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. When I was a child, I was a fanatic about Greek mythology, and this was one of my favorite myths.
In this story, King Minos would send 7 boys and 7 girls to Crete every year as retribution for his murdered son. They would be placed in a labyrinth to be devoured by the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull monster which lived inside it. The parallels between this and the Hunger Games themselves are quite obvious, but they're not entirely the same. Rather than being a direct copy, Suzanne puts a spin on the idea by changing many important details. Instead of being a direct sacrifice, the boys and girls are forced to fight to the death on live television, with only one winner. While the retribution element is similar, it's in the context of an authoritarian society reminding the districts of their failed rebellion 74 years prior. The core setting and story beats of the Hunger Games are not original. Instead, Suzanne's creativity comes from combining different ideas together. She isn't just taking this myth of Theseus and doing a new version of it, but mixing the real-world history of gladiatorial combat, totalitarian societies, and reality TV together to create something new. Of course, it's not enough to combine ideas and just hope it works. A smart author or screenwriter needs to do it with the intention of serving their overarching theme. Fundamentally, The Hunger Games is asking its viewers a very simple question. How might an authoritarian society keep its people from rebelling against them? Suzanne's answer was through entertainment, which is where the reality TV aspect comes into play.
One night I was lying in bed and I was just sort of channel surfing. I was flipping through images of reality television. Then I was flipping and I was seeing footage from the Iraq War. And these two things began to sort of fuse together in a very unsettling way.
From this, adding gladiatorial combat to the mix feels like a natural progression of the brainstorming process. During the Roman Empire, these games were famously used to entertain the masses and distract them from wider societal issues, meaning its inclusion in the narrative continues to serve the overarching theme. We can also draw parallels between Katniss and Theseus. In that myth, he slays the Minotaur and puts an end to King Minos's cruel demands, somewhat similar to how Katniss becomes a figurehead for the rebellion and ends the games. What I'm trying to get at is that all ideas come from somewhere, so writers need to think of original ways to combine them to serve their core themes. Since it was the first of the big three to get adapted, and the author herself co-wrote the screenplay, the Hunger Games movies do a great job at translating its fundamental concepts into picture form. Just really quick, I want to thank everyone for all your support on my videos so far. I read every one of your comments and you've all been so kind. Could you please double check that you're subscribed, as 99% of my viewers aren't? Appreciate it big time. While the Hunger Games movies were great, I can unfortunately not say the same for the next two. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. The Maze Runner films are terrible, and diverge so much from the books that it's honestly hard to talk about this franchise without mentioning them both. I won't spend too long on this section, mainly because I've already discussed the right way to steal ideas. Released in 2009, the first Maze Runner book was a smash hit and quickly got 2 sequels. Written by author James Dashner, it follows a group of teenagers who are trapped in a maze with no memory. After escaping, it is revealed that they are part of an experiment to find a cure for a disease that's turning humans into mindless cannibalistic psychos. The first film was released in 2014, at the height of the young adult dystopia craze. Look, say what you want about the story itself, but it's hard to argue that the Maze Runner universe doesn't have cool world building. Again, each individual idea isn't unique, but it's their combination that makes for something fresh. The gliders being trapped behind the walls can be traced back to the concept of Plato's cave. This allegory describes a group of people living underground, unaware of the world that exists outside of it. Many novelists and filmmakers have written characters living in an artificial world, with some popular examples including The Truman Show and The Matrix. In fact, the first volume of the Attack on Titan manga was released in the same year as The Maze Runner, and that features an entire society trapped behind walls. While this isn't unique, the series starts to become original when the gliders escape the maze. The twist that it's all an experiment isn't even much of a twist, because the signs were there all along. The artificially designed grievers, Wicked's mysterious presence, and the fact that they're in a maze. The parallels to lab rats are not subtle. Unfortunately, the flare virus in the movies is way less cool than in the books, being turned into a generic zombie plague. Luckily, this doesn't take away from the thematic coherence of ideas. Wicked performing these experiments is justified due to the severe nature of the virus, and raises a very interesting ethical question as to whether it's worth torturing children to find a cure. Like the Hunger Games, this combination of ideas creates something new, with each element building upon each other in a satisfying way. Now for the main course. Veronica Roth released the first Divergent novel in 2011. It follows Triss, a teenage girl boss who lives in a society divided into 5 factions, based on different personality traits. A trilogy of these movies based on them began in 2014. Fun fact, they tried to split the last novel into 2 parts like The Hunger Games, but Allegiant's awful box office performance and reviews meant it just never got made. The main concept is quite silly when you think about it, but this on its own isn't the issue I have with the Divergent films. In fact, from listening to interviews with Veronica Roth, her inspiration and ideas actually sound really cool.
I kind of got the little piece of the idea for the books when I was enrolled in a psychology class my first year at university. I was learning about exposure therapy, which is a method of treating people with anxiety and phobias, and that's where I came up with the creepy simulated realities that the Dauntless use to help people eradicate their fears.
Honestly, a dystopian world where the police force use these simulations is a great idea. It opens up all sorts of questions about how a character might lose their empathy for others through repeated training. The problems start arising when the movies try to hammer in as many cliches as humanly possible. Divergent falls flat because it copies the authoritarian society from the Hunger Games and the post-apocalyptic world of the Maze Runner without coherently meshing the two together. Let's first start with the concept of a divergent. I know this is the name of the movie, but it's honestly the idea that ruins its world building the most. A totalitarian society dividing its citizens into arbitrary groups makes complete sense, even if the way they do it is a little weird. The problem is that technically everyone should be at least a little bit divergent. Selflessness, kindness, honesty, bravery, and intelligence are traits that every single person possesses varying levels of. According to the movie though, diversions are extremely rare, so does that mean everyone who isn't in erudite is just stupid? It's clear that the idea only exists to make Triss the chosen one. This is a trope that has become boring due to its repeated use across fiction. It can still be done well, of course, but only if tension is created by making the protagonist rethink their status. In The Matrix, Neo is explicitly told by the Oracle that he is in fact not the one, sowing doubt in his mind as to whether he can save humanity. In Dune, Paul is constantly wondering whether he is the Kwisatz Haderach due to his conflicting visions. Unfortunately, we never once doubt Triss's status as a divergent during these movies. In fact, the second explicitly says that she is 100% divergent, eliminating tension entirely. This was a terrible decision by the filmmakers and one that didn't exist in the books. The audience loses all their investment when hearing this, as now we know for a fact that Triss will open the MacGuffin box. She's the only one who possibly can. I don't often like to tell filmmakers that their vision is wrong, but I'm gonna make a suggestion. Let's imagine how much better the narrative will be if Triss wasn't a divergent. In fact, let's just get rid of them entirely. Now her actions have a lot more weight and meaning behind them. Triss deciding to defect and join Dauntless, despite being born into abnegation, says a lot more about her character than if she already possessed all 5 traits. Her choice to rise against the system would be powerful due to being an ordinary teenage girl, just like Katniss Everdeen. By simply copying the factions concept from the Hunger Games, however, the producers of these films failed to understand what made it work in the first place. Moving on, let's examine the second aspect that was copied from the more popular franchise: the society living behind walls. Like I mentioned earlier, this is another trope that has been done numerous times, including in The Maze Runner. The difference instead is how each series justifies having their characters be part of an experiment. Divergent's story is set in a futuristic Chicago surrounded by walls. However, this aspect doesn't become relevant until the end of the second film. Prior to this, there's not even the slightest hint that it might all be an experiment, as the focus is on the conflict between the factions. When the reveal happens, it instead feels like a cheap way to foil Janine's plans. Contrast this to The Maze Runner, where the artificial world is obvious from the beginning. The Gladers are surrounded by a maze, roaming with mechanical beasts, have no memory of the outside world, and new boys are sent up an elevator once a month. The reveal that it's an experiment doesn't feel forced due to the clues laid out before. Both franchises also feature a post-apocalyptic world beyond the walls, however they approach this concept very differently. The Maze Runner has a virus that turns people into cannibals, meaning humanity is at real risk of being wiped out. Since finding a cure is essential, Wicked's justifications for running the experiment are valid. We get a really interesting thematic question of whether putting children through such physical and psychological torture is good for the benefit of humanity. Now let's compare this to Allegiant, which I still cannot properly understand to this day. Apparently, humanity almost wipes itself out due to disagreements over altering genetics. The Bureau of Genetic Welfare are therefore trying to produce someone who's genetically pure, as opposed to others who are genetically damaged. The problem with this explanation is that humanity isn't under threat at all. As far as I'm aware, there's no obvious difference between people who are pure and damaged. So why are we even bothering with this? If the world almost wiped itself out, society should instead be focused on rebuilding. Unlike Wicked, the BGW have no justification for their experiment, meaning they just come across as comically evil. The Divergent series copied these two main aspects from other franchises, but failed to understand why they worked in their respective contexts. The end result is therefore a mishmash of different themes and ideas with no clear purpose or goal. By failing to unify its concepts, the films end up cliche and forgettable. Which one of the big three is your favourite? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Please leave me a like if you enjoyed this analysis, and subscribe for more videos like this one.